Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, and today I'm joined by Lamisse, who is the HR Director, Purpose, Culture and Inclusion Lead at Deloitte Middle East. And I'm very happy to have her on the show to share her wisdom with you all today. Welcome to the show, Lamisse.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's going to be a really interesting conversation. I actually obviously invited you onto the podcast after hearing you on Scott Armstrong's podcast over at Mental. So for our listeners that perhaps haven't heard of that podcast, you're probably living under a rock somewhere. Go and check that out if you haven't already. But there's some real nuggets of wisdom and some topics that really need to have a spotlight shone on them. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you in to share some of the work that you're doing. But if this is our listeners' first time hearing from you, would you like to just introduce yourself to our listeners and perhaps some of the key things that have contributed to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So once again, thank you for having me, and thanks for kind of continuing this conversation from the discussion that I had with Scott. I think this is it's always great. I love this topic. So my name is Lamisse Muhtaseb, as you said. I've been in the Middle East for about 16 years. Born and raised in the UK, did travel a little bit when I was young. I kind of moved around a little bit, but I do have Middle Eastern heritage. So 16 years ago, I moved out to Dubai, and I've been working at Deloitte for the last 12 years. I'm a mom of two, and it's funny because actually just the other day I was thinking I need to set myself a new challenge just to add that to, a little bit of an intro, in terms of some of my hobbies, some of the things that I do. And so I'm deciding what that could be. But I am a keen scuba diver. I am a keen hiker. I love mountain hikes. I love the outdoors. I love being outside. And it's so important for me to get my kids out there too. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, I love that so much. And I love that you've thrown that in there because it's so important, isn't it, to add that people element to an introduction. Like you just like everybody else, like we've all got our own little things that we're interested in. We've got our quirks, we've got our fun things, and we've got our expertise. And I think there's clearly some overlap in what you do and the things that you're interested in. Like you've mentioned there, like scuba diving, hiking, like very active things. So I'm going to assume that well-being is important to you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's so important to me on so many fronts. I think so many people use the term work-life balance, and I've always said, my work is part of my life. It's really important to me. It helps me with my sense of purpose. It really contributes to who I am. So I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I always say work and life are very much combined with me and all very important. And I think they're just two broad terms, work and life. But yeah, I think well-being is super important to me. And like many people, and probably yourself, you've been through so many ups and downs with that and what that looks like and how that's changed. And for me, it definitely has over the years. And as I hit transitions in my life, well-being changes so much. And when I put my work hat on, it also means something so incredibly different because the workplace has just transitioned so much on that front when we do talk about well-being and how important this is for people and being able to give their best.
So what does that look like to you when you've got your work hat on? What does well-being in the workplace actually mean to you based on your experience and perhaps even the way you've seen it evolve over the years? Like where are we at now?
I think you're absolutely right with that word. It has evolved so much over the years. I think, I've always said 10 years ago, we didn't have people sitting in the boardroom talking about how they feel. But it doesn't mean they don't have feelings. It doesn't mean that they're not going through something. And I think that's just common sense. We all know that we go through things. And I think it's turning common sense into common practice and a safe space to be able to talk about that. So I do think it's evolved an awful lot. I think there have been a few triggers along the way, which has accelerated the conversation about well-being. And for many companies, including Deloitte, there was always almost an unwritten or culture there that hopefully did allow people to talk about well-being, or to at least speak to their line manager, or speak to their supervisor, or speak to trusted advisors in the business about things that they're going through. But I think the important thing in the workplace now is to understand how well-being is part of how we do business as well. It impacts absolutely everyone. It's such an important conversation. It's part of your business strategy, which is how do we ensure that we have the well-being of our people, the well-being of our societies, the well-being of our business. It's such a broad scope, and that comes under what we call people sustainability, which is the long-term well-being of all of these things, and they're not stagnant. And I think that's the important thing to really keep in mind, that these are not stagnant they're not stagnant areas. You know, when we do talk about the well-being of our people, and what those initiatives that we roll out, all of the support channels that are created, that many companies are creating, and Deloitte has plenty of them, from an employee assistance program to well-being, you know, mental health first aiders to mental health advocates, to, you know, all of these different initiatives that happen. You know, you really have to keep them, you have to keep the momentum alive, and you have to keep them relevant. And so I think it's so important to keep that going and to keep talking about that, because it does affect productivity, it does affect absenteeism, it does affect retention, you know, and also it affects behavior. It affects behavior in the business. And there's, you know, there's so much neuroscience and research now that's coming out around, you know, the emotional culture and being able to very openly be vulnerable, be honest about well-being, and that to a certain extent creates a very safe space and asks permission of other people to do that. And it really can very positively impact the culture in which people are working in, to feel that they can be very honest and very open about the things that they're going through and what they need to be able to continue and to thrive and reach their full potential.
Yeah, that's so spot on. I love the fact that you mentioned that. It's ever changing, isn't it? It's a very fluid concept as well, well-being. Yes, there's some core fundamentals that are true and universal for everyone, but ultimately it's going to look different depending on the organization type, based on the organization goals. But you said something really important there, and I'm sure our listeners will resonate with it because they're actually listening to this podcast in the first place. But you said so casually, well-being is part of the business strategy. And actually for many it's not yet. Let's say that. But also, our listeners for sure are intrigued with well-being, if not already taking action on it within organizations, which is amazing. So what are some of the common challenges that you're seeing when it comes to well-being in the workplace? If you had to perhaps have like one or two key things that you're seeing right now, like what are the biggest kind of bottlenecks or challenges that we're seeing?
Yeah, no, you know, going back to it being part of the business, I think this really comes down to the maturity of your maturity model around well-being. You know, I think it really did start as an HR project, which is we need to put some well-being support channels in place. And, you know, this is, you know, quite historic around really making sure that there's something there, some structure and some framework around well-being, the support that we give, even if it was down to, you know, medical insurance, you know, to that level. But I think it's so much more. And like you said, it has evolved and it has evolved and it has evolved. And it goes from being an HR project to something that the leaders are responsible for, something that certain advocates in the business are responsible for, to something that's, you know, a policy. And then, you know, as you become more mature, it's everyone's invested in this and everyone's bringing this to the table. And it is, you know, it's on the leadership agenda and it's part of how we do business. And I do think one of the challenges, coming back to your question, is probably around the consistency of being able to implement that and being able to ensure that there's some consistency around the employee experience in any company. And I'd probably say Deloitte's no exception. You know, there's a lot of work, and this is why we have those dedicated resources to this, which is to make sure that there is a consistency around the people having a very similar experience with their well-being being supported. But also creating the space for them to still be able, you know, to talk about that. I mean, there was putting in a bit of a gender lens on this. There was a Women at Work report, I think, that came out from Deloitte just about a month ago, and this is a global outlook. This is not a Middle East, and it's not Deloitte specific. It's a market report, and it did talk a little bit about the impact of mental health and the impact of that on career progression, the impact of that on productivity and so on. And people are increasingly concerned about their mental health, for example, but they do also feel like, and the needle has moved quite positively, that people do actually feel like they can talk about it. But there's still a really long way to go and be able to create those safe spaces, remove those stigmas. There's a lot of cultural norms that can get in the way, a lot of, you know, regional, not necessarily in this region or this culture, but, you know, we're such a melting pot, aren't we? And we have cultures from around the world. And I think, you know, there are those stigmas that still need to be challenged around being able to talk about well-being and mental health and things like that. So I think those two things, as you said, I don't know if you agree with me, but I do think that it's around just making sure that there's some consistency there around how wellbeing is implemented in the business. And also, yeah, just breaking down, still working on those stigmas, you know, and just breaking down those barriers that some people may face.
That's
Around talking about them.
it is so aligned as well with the themes that we see, and from all these podcast episodes from the organizations we work with, they are still, I would say, the top challenges. And again, like we said, it's always going to be different depending on organization and the different ages within organizations. There's many factors there, but I think the consistency is a huge piece of the puzzle, because like one of the common bits of feedback we get with a lot of the wellbeing leads that we work with is that there's excitement initially about a certain initiative or a program or how they're going to roll something out, and it's all well and good, but those wellbeing leads typically also have less time available to deliver on that, because often wellbeing is an add-on to a role rather than a role itself. Like you said, whether it's sitting with HR or whether it's sitting with just somebody that champions it within an organization, it's almost like a secondary thing. And then from there, though, it's like they get the buy-in for this one initiative or this one thing that's going to kick it all off, but then the momentum dies down. And that's the bit where I think that consistency piece sits so beautifully. So what would you say to somebody that's listening to this that is struggling to get that consistency and to keep that momentum going? Because the initial kick dies down, perhaps the funding isn't as much as what they would like to continue a program as well within an organization, but maybe they are literally lacking the resource of time to be able to deliver on it.
Yeah, I think there's an element there of just making sure that, of being very clear on what you're trying to address, you know, and ensuring that the right interventions, the right solutions are developed based on what are we trying to address here, you know, because it's such a broad topic as well. And I think there are generally kind of three main pillars when we talk about well-being. You know, there is the one-off events, you know, the nice things such as going off-site, which I think have a huge impact. And I think that social element of well-being is so important, being able to have a little bit of fun at work as well, but being able to really focus on, you know, an off-site where there's a menu of options where you can get involved in yoga, an ice bucket, an ice bathing, or, you know, some contrast therapy, you know, whatever that might look like, or out paddleboarding, you know, just getting out with the team and doing some things, you know, that are focused on wellbeing. So I think there's those one-off events, and even when people come into the office sometimes, don't they, and they offer some wellbeing things. So I think that those events are really good, but kind of the next day it's back to work, isn't it? So I think that perhaps the momentum of those are really good because I think they're quite uplifting. There's the other element there, I think, which is around those workshops, the education piece, making sure that you've got the right speakers in, you've got the expert knowledge coming in to talk to people about wellbeing and help them understand, and then linking it into, like, if you're feeling any of this, these are the support channels that are available. For example, we had a bit of a wellbeing month, really focused on wellbeing in October last year, and we called it a little bit of a wellbeing festival, where we had speakers coming in. But for example, we had, you know, talks on menopause, we had talks on men's mental health, we had, you know, a number of things, and we partnered with a number of clinics and companies who support us with that. But for example, we did women's health, and what we did is we really encouraged our male colleagues to attend that and really understand a little bit about women's health, because women kind of understand women's health a little bit. But we also did one about men's mental health, and the men's mental health one, which is just, you know, it's a huge topic, and a real focus for us. We asked a lot of our female colleagues to join that and understand men's mental health a little bit. So it's really bringing together everyone to understand what, even from a gender lens, what everyone could perhaps be going through. And then there's kind of that third piece. So you've kind of got your events, you've got your workshops, your education, get those experts in and gain that knowledge and that insight. But then there's exactly what we were saying around, you know, making it part of how we do business. That is things, for example, like your employee assistance program, and really promoting that, because, you know, you ask a lot of companies who have an employee assistance program what the utilization is of that. And you ask the people in the business, do you know where to find out about your employee assistance program? There's always a bit of a gap, I think, what a lot of companies face. And we've done a lot of work at Deloitte to make sure that that's really part of you know, our dialogue, you know, make sure you reach out for help and so on. But then there's the policies around wellbeing and the allowances around wellbeing and some of those areas which is really embedded in our business practices.
Yep.
So I think depending on what you're trying to achieve at that time and where your gap is really where you focus. And so if it's really about breaking down some stigmas and keeping that dialogue going, I would suggest bringing those people in to talk about it and creating permission and safe space for others to do the same. And we've always had really positive feedback when we've had those speakers in, but that consistency really helps, you know, repeat, keep talking about it and keep understanding what you're trying to address. For us, the strategy is very much focused on mental health. And so, you know, we do a lot of work around that. It doesn't mean we don't pay attention to, you know, financial well-being and physical and emotional well-being. Emotional well-being is very much linked in with mental health, but you know, those other areas of well-being definitely get our attention as well. But I think that's probably one of our main focuses. So we're quite clear on what we're trying to talk about and what we're trying to work on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing kind of the way you look at it through those kind of three lenses as well of what's available to you, because I think sometimes, yeah, you know, a lot of wellbeing leads that perhaps are doing this as an add-on or don't even have necessarily a particular expertise or background in these areas, it can be also quite overwhelming. So not only is it hard to get traction and keep traction, it's very overwhelming because it is such a broad subject. So I love what you said there. Was like, know what you want to achieve, know where your gaps are, and then essentially shop for your gaps and then start to build.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think that's it, because I don't think, you know, I don't think there's an off the shelf necessarily that works for everyone. And I really think you need to be really adaptable to what is happening in your business and how people are feeling. Is it, you know, long hours, lots of travel? Is it family focused challenges? You know, what is it that people, is it flexibility? And that's such a huge thing. It comes out in nearly every report I read, to be honest, around the impact of you know, flexibility and accommodations for people to meet all of their commitments.
Yeah.
And not just their work commitments, which are, you know, obviously very important, but there's so many other commitments that people have. And so, you know, what is needed? And I do think that some of this, you know, you see a lot of common themes, I think, that you kind of really know where you're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because as we've been speaking, there is a common thread kind of linking to where it is I want to go next with this conversation, which is around, you've mentioned gender, you've mentioned everybody has their own unique kind of barriers and different commitments that they have as well. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring you into this conversation today in particular was to shine a bit of a spotlight on your maternity program. So I'd love for you to share, how is that linked to everything we've just been talking about? What is it and why do we need to know about it?
Yeah. Internship program where we have I think, you know, when we look at our population and we keep talking about gender representation, and this is a thing, you know, in the market as well, around really increasing gender representation at the more senior levels, we've got such a fantastic pipeline of women and nationals coming through. But we, you know, we understand that, you know, life changes and sometimes business doesn't. But I think that there's a construct there that we really had to challenge ourselves on. I think many companies have to challenge themselves on around, does this work for our people, for our, you know, if we talk about we want 50, 60% of 40 or 50%, well, you know, whatever that target may be of our population to be women, or does the business really foster you know, does it provide women what they need? Does it really foster those working practices that women need to be able to face those transitions in their life? The returnship program, which we call Returnity, was really focused on returning parents, but kind of designed for the women in our business, but not exclusive to the women in our business, to look at how they're returning from maternity leave. And we have quite a favourable leave policy, but and a lot of people, generally a lot of women, do choose to take extended maternity leave, which means you could be coming back to the business after 4 months, after 6 months, after a year. And then what? You know, it's not you pick up where you left off. I don't think that's really how it works. And I think so many women do struggle to really understand what it is they need. I don't think they have all the answers. So it was really about creating a program that allows women a bit of flexibility in how and when they come back from maternity leave, and what the world needs to look like for this to work for them not to feel that they're in a position where they have to choose one or the other, or put in a position, but more than anything, it was really about managing some expectations of the people around them. And I think that was always a challenge for so many women, is to say, I know I faced it when I came back from my first maternity leave and had such a fantastic line manager, and he said, what do you need? And I said, I genuinely don't know. I don't know how this is going to work. It could possibly change from this month to next month. And it's really hard to have all the answers. So what maternity does is really create a transition program that is really dynamic. So it's a 16-week transition program to help women almost design their return plan around, do we need to put a pause on travel? Are there some restrictions around, how often you can be in the office, and how often you can be at client site, or how often you can be with your team, and when you need to be home, or your timings, or do you need to come back part-time for the first 4 weeks? And then, so there's a menu of things for our returning parents to look through and think about, how does this need to look for the first 16 weeks back? And that can change. It can look a certain way for a few weeks and certain way for the next few weeks. And then hopefully what we think is, after 16 weeks, you have a better idea of what needs to happen, and then you can kind of pick it up from there and work with that, with the relevant line managers or senior leaders. And with that, we set the expectations, and it's really in agreement with the business around what can work as well. And then with that, you kind of are much better equipped to manage expectations around what you can deliver, and where you can be, and how long you can be there when you do return. So it was anchored in well-being. It was really anchored in women feeling like they are supported, and returning parents feeling like they are supported when they return to work, when they have young children at home, when they're starting a family. There is enough support there. There's counselling if they need it. There's, in addition to the employee assistance program, in addition to the the medical insurance and so on, there's counselling that they can tap into, and there's accommodations made for them to make sure that they can very comfortably come back and transition back into work, and and then what that looks like for them going forward. And we've had some really great feedback. It was really important for us to make sure that we had people help us design that, and really kind of women who are going on maternity leave pilot this for us, and think and tell us, what was your return like? And we had one lady who was just fantastic. It was actually her 4th maternity leave. So she had maternity from quite a junior grade, and now at a senior grade, going off for the 4th time. I mean, that's a whole different topic. But I've done 2, and that's plenty. But she came back from her 4th, and she was saying that this was such a different experience for her in a really positive way, and gave us some tips around how about we do this and that, and you get assigned a buddy or a mentor and people to talk to and people to support you. So it creates more of a community when you come back, and I think that really helped.
I love everything about this program. I don't know if I can make that any more obvious based on our previous conversations as well. Like, it's just so important, because I've seen the other side of it. Just to give you an example, for example, there was one lady that was coming back into work. Nobody knew she was coming back in that day, so she's coming to work. She was feeling exceptionally anxious because it was the first time leaving the first child as well, and she was just like completely overwhelmed. A lot of the team had changed. She had no idea who was there. She didn't know what their roles were, and she was expected to just come straight in and pick up where she left off. So you can only imagine what was going on with her, and just wanting to get out of there pretty much straight away. And that's just one example, and I'm sure there are many, many more that are quite extreme, and it can be so detrimental, not only for the organization but also for that individual, and then the message that sends to everybody else in that organization. It's just like, that's a recipe for disaster in my eyes.
I agree with you, and I think it can be so overwhelming coming back from maternity leave. And for a lot of women, what I've heard is, and I experienced it, you lose a bit of confidence, and so if you're coming back to work and you don't really know anyone, and people have kind of covered for you, and the business has ticked along quite nicely without you, and you've been out of the game for 6 months or so, you come back and your confidence could be shaken a little bit. And that's why part of this program is to make sure that there's contact with that person, with our employee before they return. To offer them, we've got a team meet a month before, for example. We've got a team meeting, do you want to just dial in so you can meet the new team before you come back? Or that check-in prior to them returning, I think is really helpful and really important, just to make sure that that connection is still there, and a bit more of a welcome back. Because I think you're right. I think exactly as we were saying, you know, a lot of people come back from maternity, paternity leave, and it's, you know, back where you know, just pick up where you left off, but the world's changed a little bit for them, you know. And it's not always easy. Yeah, a lot. It's a different world. Absolutely.
I think it's one of the things I really like about your program as well. It's about bringing other people into the conversation. It's not just about mum or dad coming back to work, right? It's about having other people in the conversation so that they are also understanding of the situation that's happening. It sounds like that's a common theme across, you know, all of the programs that you have there. It's like it's inclusion, right? You're including everybody, which is perfect. But I think it's very easy for organizations perhaps to focus on that one person and their experience without looking at that social element. And like, how important is that for somebody returning back to the workplace?
So you actually are absolutely right. So our wellbeing strategy is part of our inclusion pillar. So our inclusion pillar actually, it falls under wellbeing. So we have, you know, Middle East councils who talk about things. We had a wellbeing council, but now we said actually it really should be part of the discussions that we have around inclusion. It is so important that people are brought into the discussions around this, because that's the only way it can really succeed, is if people really understand the importance of it. I mean, these women, these fathers, these working parents are so important to the business. Their competency and their value, and, you know, their capabilities and their potential and their ambitions have not changed. They've not changed because they become a parent, and they still matter very, very much to the business. They're still really important members of the team. So, you know, just like before, being able to support before they've gone off on, you know, any kind of parental leave, is making sure that they have what they need to be able to succeed. And that's the equity point, isn't it? It's really kind of, it's leveling that playing field and making sure that everyone has what they need to be able to pursue opportunities and to be able to pursue a career. And that can't sit with only one person. It really is everyone has a role to play in really achieving that and achieving true inclusion. And whether, you know, it's about advocating for someone, or it's about, you know, just bringing them into the conversation if they are having a bit of a tough day with their confidence, or kind of getting back into the swing of things because, you know, they haven't got the knowledge of you know, the last 3 to 6 months when they've been on leave, just bringing them back in. And that, you know, everyone has a role to play, in my view, of ensuring that happens.
Yeah, I think longevity plays a big part in it as well, isn't it? Is ensuring that your team have, like you said at the beginning, that consistency over time, because like parental burnout is very real experience, and it doesn't just affect mum, it affects dad as well, and that's often overlooked. And I think that's really important. Typically, men's mental health, like one of the contributing factors that is heavier in men than women typically is the financial stress and financial burden. And if we couple that in with now being a parent, and suddenly your world changing, but you've got to be that strong person for your partner, and you've got to go into work and pretend like you're okay because there's a stigma about mental health, again, another recipe for disaster. So like, what's your thoughts on that and your take on that?
So men's mental health and the role that men play in their family is such a priority. I mean, I can even really talk about this on a personal level. I have my personal views on kind of really the rigid expectations on a lot of men in society, to be, as we said, you know, protector, provider, you know, and I think men generally, especially fathers, really want to be a lot more than that in their families, and they want to be so involved in their children's life. I mean, my husband just loves hanging out with the girls, to be honest. He loves it. He loves picking them up from school and taking them to activities and watching the swimming galas and watching, you know, that we've got a show tomorrow that we're going, my daughter's going to be dressed up as a camel or something like that. And you know, who would want to miss that? You know, who wants to miss seeing their children dressed up as party camels? So, you know, these moments are so important to so many parents. And you know, I've always had a bit of an issue with kind of those rigid expectations around, you know, not needing to take paternity leave when and I think, you know, the government initiatives and the laws changing have been really positive steps in that direction. From a Deloitte perspective, we've had those paternity policies in place for a really long time. So even when we were more favourable than the legal provisions, that was still something that, you know, we took very, very seriously, and we continue to be more favourable than the legal provisions, because I see that as, you know, I think the legal provisions generally tell you this is the minimum you should be doing.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, this is a minimum you should be doing, and you want to do more, of course, you know, and so we've taken some decisions to be more favourable than that, and I think that's really positive. But again, you know, those stigmas still exist for a lot of men who come back, a lot of new fathers, and again, this is everyone's business to change those stigmas, and we're doing a lot of work around that, around the education of that, and the policies that we're writing, whether it's having, you know, extended leave for you know, for any reason, but a lot of the time it is related to family commitments and wanting to be there. But yeah, I do think it's incredibly important. Men's mental health is, you know, there's not really two camps. It's not, you know, there's health and then there's men's mental health. You know, it really is everyone's business, and it applies to everyone. A lot of the time, the well-being programs or the well-being initiatives that we have in the discussions are so focused to women. And I'm not in favor of that. I think, you know, we really try and have a much broader reach and tailor it. You know, there are some wellbeing discussions that are more focused for women and more that are more relevant to men. But you know, I think you're right. I think sometimes, you know, when men do come in to the business and say, you know, I need to not travel. I need to just, you know, be in one location because, you know, I need to be here for my child because my wife is going back to work. You know, this is how it's everyone's business. If we want to empower women in society, then we have to empower men to be able to have those conversations too. And so there's a whole ecosystem around really making this work.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so important. And we really recognize that. But this is really changing the dialogue. This is, and as you said, there's been a real evolution of changing this dialogue, and I'm really pleased about that. We've still got a long way to go as a society in making sure that, you know, there are support channels and a very safe environment for everyone to talk about their well-being and their family commitments and all the places that they need to be. But I do think that the role of men in families and society is so important to be able to support that.
Yeah, I love the word you used there about it being an ecosystem, because I think well-being is an ecosystem. When we look globally, when we look at our immediate society, when we look then at an organization as well, like it's another community where we need to start to look at it like an ecosystem rather than a plug and play. And I think that's a bridge that we're starting to cross now through conversations like this, through the amazing programs that are out there. And there's some fantastic people in this region doing some really amazing work. And I think when the people that are looking after well-being projects, specific goals within an organization can start to widen that purview, I think that's when we'll really start to gain more and more traction of what really does work and what doesn't, because it's still so early on looking at it through this lens that I think the proof of what works and what doesn't work is still quite fluid in itself. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. But I think, you know, we can see so much more happening on this front as well, such as our discussion today and the work that you're doing and the podcast and the discussions and the dialogue that you yourself are continuing to have. We met at a wellbeing summit, didn't we, a couple of months ago, and you know, it was 2 days of wellbeing discussions, and there's another one next week, and there's these events and there's dedicated discussions to this, understanding, you know, what the impact is on business performance, what the impact is on employee engagement, on absenteeism, on retention, on even attracting new talent. So this has such a huge impact on the whole business, and the dialogue is just continuing. And I think that these kind of conversations and the programs help, the initiatives help, but the dialogue and the conversation is really what makes a difference, I think.
Yeah, definitely, it really does. So let's say, and I always ask this question, so our listeners will be like, here she goes again. When there is somebody that is perhaps on the fence and they're thinking, this sounds like something my organization might need, what is the thing that, from your perspective, that brings them over the fence? What's the thing that drives somebody into action? What should they be looking for if they're on the fence with like a return to work program?
Yeah, I like this because you can be on the fence. There's so many different things you can do. There's so many options, and everyone will have an idea about what will impact well-being and what will prevent burnout and what will make people feel supported. And there's so many opinions and views and research around this. And I would say, you know, as we look at these programs and as we think about them, we often sit there and think, is this, number one, is this going to make the right impact to the right people and the right population? And does it have the right reach? And how can we implement it? And do we have what we need for this to be not just implemented, but then sustained and delivered properly? And something that I was saying when we met, when I was speaking to Scott, was, what if we don't do this? You know, does this still, can we still achieve what we're trying to achieve? Can we still work towards our ambitions and our goals on this front, on this strategy, if we didn't have this program? And almost kind of imagine what it was like doing something else, or if someone else did it and you didn't, and you know, just really understanding the impact that is trying to make, and how can we measure it, and does it, you know. And I think sometimes, while we've launched a maternity program, we know that can be scaled to anyone who's taken leave. You know, that can be scaled to anyone who's decided to take a sabbatical. That can be scaled to someone who is returning to work after not working for a couple of years. So it's a really adaptable program. So also really looking at programs, or when you're on the fence with something, which is, you know, how adaptable is this, or how rigid is it? You know, can it have a wider reach? Who are the beneficiaries, and can that be expanded? Because I think you don't want to keep creating something new. You want to be able to adapt and leverage what already exists.
Yes.
And I think that's where, yeah, you know, and I think that's really where a lot of companies can focus. I mean, we certainly do. We have so many really wonderful programs and initiatives, and we think, you know, are we getting the most from these? Are we leveraging them enough?
Yeah.
Do we have enough beneficiaries of this to have the right reach? I mean, we're Middle East, we're quite a big region. And so we want to make sure that it's reaching everyone, and so that's what I would say. I think if people are really considering what's right for their organization, is a few of those things to think about.
That is like gold. You know, what if we don't do this, and how can we enhance what we've already got? Those are two really powerful questions to ask yourself before you start going, or you know, going and implementing anything because it's the novelty right now and it looks like everybody else is doing it. It looks like, based on this piece of research, it means we should do that. Actually, no, look inward first and then go for it, right?
I think for a lot of companies, if you walk the floor and you ask people what policies exist or what allowances there are, or you know, where can you go if you need to speak to a counsellor, or where would you go? Like, what does your medical insurance cover when it comes to, you know, psychiatric care?
Yep.
I don't think they know. I think for a lot of people, as you walk the floor, I'm not sure they really know, and I'm not sure they really know that it also extends to their families.
Yep.
You know, so their families can have access to a lot of these things. And we certainly have that with our employee assistance program, where this extends to their immediate families and they can use that. And so I think sometimes you really have to just keep doing, you have to keep doing awareness campaigns and make people realize just how much there is, rather than trying to think of something new and something new and something new, because you can use what already exists and create those programs, those policies, those practices, that is more about, you know, it can reach everyone. It can even be wider than just kind of who's sitting in the office today. It's much wider than that. And again, that's really where that ecosystem comes in, because if we're offering support for their employees, plus their spouses, plus their kids, older kids, then you know, that's so much support that's extended. And I think, you know, that's so important. So yeah, I am a really big fan of looking at what already exists and does it still work, and how can we leverage it?
Yeah, and I think the communication piece of that is huge. You're absolutely right. I've got a classic example of that when we was just in the initial conversations with an organisation. So we went in, we were speaking to leadership about their needs, and I said, well, have we asked the staff? Like, have we spoken to them? Do we know where we are? Most of the time, the answer to that is generally no anyway, or they've got an idea, but it's just general. And so it's like, okay, well, let's speak to them. So we was running some different focus groups just to understand what their perception of wellbeing was within their organisation. And none of them knew that they had access to so many resources. I think it was around 12% of people actually knew what they had. So literally all we had to do is create that communication and the awareness of it, like you said, an awareness campaign, and immediately those numbers started to lift. The perception of well-being started to change in the way that they felt supported, but also genuinely based on their experience of their own well-being, because now they are actually using these resources. So it can be as easy as that, can't it?
I think so. And I think, like you said, the more you communicate it, the more it's, well, we mean it. We really mean it. You know, when we say we're going to support you, we really do mean it. We have all of these things. We're not just saying this. And we do those engagement surveys as well, where every 6 months, actually, we have kind of a check-in with everyone at all grades. And we have 2 or 3, it's a short survey, but nearly half of it is about well-being and feeling supported and feeling like you can talk to your line manager and your team leader. And that gives us a really good touch point around, do people feel supported? Yes. Do people feel like they can talk about it? Really different thing we're trying to address there. One is we've got the programs. One is we've got the safe space for people to use it and people to talk about the support that they need. And so, you know, you really have to measure all of these things. And that you're absolutely right. The communication, the awareness campaign is really what is needed to build the trust that when we talk about well-being, is we're not launching a program initiative and then it's there and use it or don't use it. It's really up to you. You know, it's not a take it or leave it thing. It's everyone's going to need this at some point. Everyone's going to need a bit of support at some point. Everyone, you know, could do with someone to talk to. And so, you know, this is I'm completely aligned with you. I think, you know, keeping that engagement, that communication, the awareness thing alive, and keeping the momentum on that is more powerful than people think.
Absolutely. And it comes back to what you said at the very beginning around trust, open, honesty. And if you have that within an organization and you trust where it is you work and you trust that your leaders are going to follow through on what they say, or now you're playing a whole different level when it comes to performance, because now you can actually push those boundaries. Like you said, leverage what we have, but you get to push to the edges. You get to usually then achieve more from a business perspective and whatever the overall objectives are as well. So there's a beautiful link there, which I love, which is all part of the ecosystem, right? So,
Yeah,
Lamisse,
you know, as you go on, you can actually link well-being into so many other activities that you do. So, for example, we have a whole sustainability agenda where we, for example, one of the activities that we do is we go out and plant mangroves, and part of that is kind of being outside, getting in a kayak with your tree, going out to the mangrove, planting them, kayaking back, throwing each other off the boat, swimming to the and I know that's not what a lot of people think, you know, a wellbeing initiative is, but it really does tap into that. And people are feeling so connected afterwards, and really, you know, a sense of purpose and achievement, and feeling like they're part of something more than serving our clients. It's serving our communities, and that has an impact on your own well-being and feeling really engaged with where you are.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting. Like, our mission at Wellness Theory is literally like, when you are healthy and well, we can be a force for good in the world. So I believe those two, you know, you don't have to do one before the other. I think when you're actually being a force for good in some way, shape or form, and you're cultivating that sense of belonging, whether that's planting mangroves or going for a walk with your colleague for a walking meeting, instead of, you know, just like sitting together, quick, let's get it done and move on to the next meeting, it creates a very different environment, and we can show up better, right? And we can be more resourceful in so many different ways.
And being a force for good is an expectation that people should have of their companies. You know, they should expect their companies to be a force for good, and they do. They do expect that. They expect to be able to be involved in initiatives that are important to our environment and our communities and our societies. And that expectation is just increasing, as you mentioned before. The generations coming up as well really do expect companies to have an agenda around this and deliver on it.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, Lamisse, I know we could sit and talk about this all day long. Sure.
I think we could.
Is there anything else you want to add to this conversation as we wrap up?
No, I mean, no, nothing necessarily from my side. I just think it's been so great to talk to you about this and to keep this dialogue going. And, you know, I think there's so many things that I think we would love to keep doing. And I think, you know, it's been such a great discussion, and I'm so glad that we continue discussion around the role that companies play in ensuring that well-being is you know, a priority in the market and in our societies and in our workplaces.
Amazing. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on. Where can our listeners come and find your work and hear you speak in different places, and the work that you do, and this particularly around the maternity program as well, if that's of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. So Deloitte Middle East is on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and so much of our work is posted on there. But also we have a Deloitte.com page where you can find out a lot about our diversity, equity, inclusion agenda, well-being, our sustainability and our CR, our purpose, our values, and lots more information about what life is like at Deloitte.
Amazing. Lamisse, thank you so much for your time and energy today. I've loved having you on the
My
show.
pleasure.
Sure, our listeners might even come follow you and grab some questions, and they'll definitely come out and check those resources if they haven't already. I'm hoping that they have, but if not, I'm sure they will, no doubt. So thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
If you enjoyed this episode and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Then share it with a friend who you think might benefit.
Spread the word. That's how we're going to impact the world, by helping each other.
We appreciate you so much, and as always, unconditional love and wellness to you.